When writing a novel, when writing a book, as you know, as everyone who's written before knows, it takes a lot of your life, right?
It does.
And life is always changing. You could move, you might not be in the same place at once. You might not be able to write it in one.
Leaders Talk, Season 2.
Hello, everybody. Hello and welcome. It's your favorite time of the week. It's my favorite time of the week. It's time for Leaders Talk. I am, as always, your intrepid host, Andrew Dupie, and thank you for being here with us today again. I know we've had a brief interlude in some of our episodes, but we are back. We are actually close to the beginning of our Season 3. Can you believe it, ladies and gentlemen? We've been here for a little while now. So I appreciate all of you for being here. And today, I want you all to appreciate Sal Cosenza for being here.
Oh,
He is the author of the genre-bending novel Manhattan, The Rising War, and is the creator of over 180 paintings, ladies and gentlemen. And while his short stories and illustrations have been featured in the widely circulated Commercial Observer real estate publication, Sal also teaches an array of interior design, history, and studio courses at Arizona State University. And he often co-hosts the Abstract Essay Podcast. So he's a fellow podcaster with Daniel Lucas. Sal, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you didn't see it. We've had a lot of trouble getting Sal on technical
yeah.
issues, storms, fire ants. It's been an adventure getting here. So Sal, I'm glad to finally have you on the show.
By hook or by crook, Andrew, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, Sal, that I think is a good introduction to you. You seem to be a man of many, many, many talents. So yeah, just something that didn't cover. Introduce yourself a little to the audience. Let them know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, that intro made me feel so prolific. Thank you for that.
It's amazing, yeah.
Yeah, I've just always been a creative type since I was a kid. I love to draw. I love to paint. I always have. Lately, I've picked up writing, and about maybe 10 years ago, I figured, how can I blend them? How can I marry them together, right? It was really 12 years ago, and I just sort of went from there. But I'm always, I believe in, different genres mixing together, right? You mentioned my book, it's a genre blend, right? It's a mix of historical fiction with urban fantasy, and this whole anthropomorphic thing that I'm obsessed with, which is when you give inanimate objects living human qualities. That's like something I always pursue in my work.
Yeah, that's something that is interesting because first of all, ladies and gentlemen, Sal, this is a novel, Manhattan: The Rising War. So this is a little unusual for some of our guests. We usually kind of talk about a lot of nonfiction. I'm very excited to talk about fiction. Yeah, there we go, Manhattan: The Rising War.
Oh!
Down below. But no,
Yes.
urban fantasy. So that is a genre that I haven't really got a lot of experience with it. My ex-wife would be the person that would would go over that for hours with you. But yeah, anthropomorphization and things like that, that's kind of a staple of that urban fantasy genre, is it not?
It can be, yeah. If you're dealing with any sort of inanimate piece of architecture, I would group it in the fantasy genre. I can't really think of too many urban fantasies other than there's N.K. Jemison's work, the author
Yeah, I'm
N.K.
familiar with that.
Jemison. The City We Became was sort of something I was inspired by as I wrote this. But it's just this concept of it's not high fantasy at all, right?
Yeah.
There are no dragons in this one.
Well,
But
let's take
it's
a second. Let's take a second and back up, and maybe tell the audience a little bit about Manhattan Rising War and the genre, because many of them may not know that there is even something that is urban fantasy. There's
yeah,
maybe something to discover today for some of us.
true. I think to have a fantasy element, you have to have a myth component to it and a legend added to it. So there are legends in this story. There's myths. It's sort of framed around this idea of Lady Liberty is sort of the leading protagonist in this ensemble of buildings. But each building has their own sort of distinct personality. So we all know Empire State Building in real life, right? Chrysler Building, Twin Towers. But in this story, they're given sort of this new personality, very individually tailored and specific. And they all sort of hail from this mythic origin story, which is based on schist. So schist rock in Manhattan Island, for those who love New York, they would know this, I think. The entire island is built on this rock called schist, which is a very strong rock, which is why the skyscrapers were able to be built and hold, right? And so I took schist as a concept and turned it into like a deity. And then you have the flip side, because every story needs an antagonist and a protagonist, right? So the enemy to schist would be pegmatite, which is another kind of rock, but it's more volcanic in nature. So I'm thinking that the antagonists in this story are sort of followers of pegmatite, whereas, Lady Liberty and those who sort of have this, I guess, democratic, utopian moral compass, they tend to follow schist, the ways of schist. So that's the fantasy element, I think, present.
Yeah, I'm unsurprised that you're an architect.
I know.
That immediately is able to find the personality in these buildings, because you're right. I mean, I have never been to New York. It's one of the few places in the United States I've never been to. I
Wow.
really want to go. But I've always looked at it, always seen that it is a skyline that has insane personality. Compared to other skylines. I mean, there's very few that you think of that have that. I mean, maybe Dallas, maybe Chicago, but New York really stands kind of on its own of something that is almost mythical when you look at it.
It is. You see the ambition of humanity when I do. When I look at that skyline, I just see everything that humanity strives for. I once did a road trip when I moved away. We were driving through Jersey, and I took one last glance at that skyline, and then I sort of took a mental note of it as I compared it to Atlanta. I love Atlanta, but
Okay,
then the skyline's impressive, New Orleans, amazing, but nothing sort of on that scale, right? In terms of, you get a different sort of vibe, a different energy, a different feeling when you compare that skyline to even Chicago. And even places like Tokyo, and around the world. There's just something about the New York skyline that I've always been enamored by. I've always just loved since 9/11, actually, watching that unfold as a kid on the news, like everyone, right? I was captivated by this horror, but also these images, these iconic structures, these towers, all lit aflame, right? And it was a horrific scene, but looking at it got me into New York. It got me into architecture. I could recall specific shots, specific photos, and like helicopter reels that stick with me. That sort of generated these ideas of the buildings, sort of mourning the loss of two of their own, and what happens in the aftermath of that, right? So 9/11 is a key component of this book, but I'm very concerned. I was really interested in giving each building a distinct and human personality, something that we could relate to. So it's not just talking buildings, it's buildings that have conflicts. They have roles in the city, leadership roles that they struggle with, like anyone else. There's romance, right? So Chrysler Building and Empire State Building, I always saw those two as compatible,
I
right?
was
So
actually thinking that was when you said the word romance. Humorously enough, that was the first thing I thought. I was like Empire and Chrysler.
they're two peas to a pod. They always were. And if you think of their history together, they were built around the same time, right? And they sort of feel similar. They're both Art Deco skyscrapers. So I always saw them as rivals, but lovers. And I
Yeah.
painted them as such. And in this story, it really gets complex with their relationship. But Lady Liberty, she's more of like the Yoda. She's the sort of oracular figure, right? She much more monkish, right? Very spiritual. She could fly. She sort of feels the pulse of the city. So when the city's doing well, she's doing well. When the city's struggling, she feels that, right? So
I
that's
think this resonates. I mean, I'm fascinated by it. I'm listening and thinking of just the way that really kind of makes sense. And I'm thinking of other, there's been people that have touched on New York as in urban fantasy or fantasy as well. I mean, heck, we all remember Ghostbusters with Lady Liberty
right,
comes to the
right.
rescue. Spoilers, everybody.
Yeah.
of a
I think it's
40-year-old
been
movie.
enough time.
I think everybody's seen it.
Right, yeah.
Um, but yeah, you think about that, and it's like there's a lot of things that have inspired people in that kind of direction of that personality, because there's a lot of old and new in New York. Like you mentioned Atlanta. Atlanta's fresh. Atlanta's very new. I mean, I mentioned I grew up in Dallas, so that skyline with the restaurant and all of the colors, it's very 60s, 70s. I mean, and it
Right.
still is today. I mean, it's a little modern, but it's very much something that's set in that time, very 1970s. New York really is a representation of the entire American experience.
Yes, and it's sort of a living museum, whereas it's not stuck in time, like you're saying, right? It's always rebuilding itself and regenerating, for better and worse, but mostly for better, right? But it's fascinating. You could walk down a street in like New York, like Little Italy, Canal Street, right? You have to go there, Andrew. I want you to go there. You got
It's
the
on the list.
perfect, you got a perfect personality for it. You'll do very well there, right? Like,
I will tell you, Sal, and our audience can enjoy this little anecdote. It's like our meeting for this
yes,
podcast. I have multiple times throughout my life had trips to New York. I have been in position to go to New York. Always had ability. Something is always intervened. Like when I was in college and university, I was in our College Bowl, and we had a College Bowl invite. I had a free trip to New York to go to College Bowl, and I got sick. It couldn't go. So always intervened. And I really want to see it, but you know, because I see what it does for you, and I see the kind of impact it has on you. I'd love to have that experience myself, and maybe our audience can have kind of that vicarious experience through the book.
I hope they do. I hope it appeals to lovers of New York, lovers of architecture. This sort of studio edition is sort of how it always was supposed to be. So I published this book last year, and it was just a straight up novel with a couple black and white images, right? But now we've added 50 or so extra pages because the story of this story actually stretches back to 2002. I started with a series, like hundreds of concept sketches and drawings that turned into 5 specific paintings. These paintings are then what I used as the basis, the storyboard, if you will, for this novel, right? So this is a novelization of paintings, essentially, and the drawings that go with it. And now the book, the studio edition, is all of that. It's sort of, behind the scenes, but I see it as very much a curated art exhibit, art experience in a book form, right? The idea is that it's a novel, it's a marriage between words and images, right? And so I think that's the only way I would have done it, because I'm just a visually minded person, right? So I'd be uncomfortable just producing a straight up novel, right? It's got to always have some sort of visual component with it.
Yeah, and I agree with that, because I think that just from what you said to me, and just from taking a look at it myself, and just the material that's there, I was immediately taken by how much this is something that's got to have a visual element. The visual element is
Yeah.
really, really, really important to everything, and I think that that's been something that has benefited a lot of books. I've always enjoyed books that have had some kind of visual attachment to it as well. So yeah, I think that that's exactly the right way to go with it in particular.
Yeah, and we played with ideas of, do I do a graphic novel? do I do this? Do I do that? And I think the way it's set up is nice. It's you read the story, you read the novel, and then you're treated to sort of how did we get there, right? So the rest of the book is sort of a chronological sequencing of the entire process that I underwent. This story and these paintings and the book, writing it, it took about 20 years of my life at least. It was just something, it was a story that just stuck with me for years. I don't know why, but I think because I was just taken by it, taken by this idea, and I wanted to represent it. And, when writing a novel, when writing a book, as you know, as everyone who's written before knows, it takes a lot of your life, right?
It does.
And life is always changing. You could move, you might not be in the same place at once. You might not be able to write it in one fell swoop. It might take, it might go through what I call development hell, right? And then you might have things like COVID-19, right? You might have a pandemic interrupting things. So a lot of sort of obstacles were present along the way. So every time I see the finished product, I'm like, oh my goodness, thank God I got it to this point, right? Because
You
it
make
could
you
have.
make a good point though, because I mean, again, I work with a lot of people that do nonfiction, and nonfiction has its own challenges. And, trying to be able to tell your story or tell a story that'll connect and resonate and contact with people. But novels are a whole different thing. A lot of people are afraid to sit down and begin a novel because at that point you are truly in creativity mode, and you're in a zone of invention that can either sometimes they can either be exciting and bring you new ideas, but it can also be something that can, like, there's so much you can slow down, you can get stuck in writer's block. So how did you overcome some of those challenges that many first time novel writers have?
Very good question. I think again, those paintings helped a great deal because that was like, those were already created for the most part, right? I was working on the last one in tandem with the book, but it was kind of like the storyboard. This was already prepared, right? The manuscript, the draft, the outline, it was already done. And I just, whenever in doubt, whenever I got lost in my own sort of world while writing, I would refer back to those paintings because those had the answers. Those had the sort of the chapter breaks, if you will.
Mhm.
Obviously a painting won't show you everything, right? It's not going to show you, every detail that a book will expand upon, right? But it was enough to sort of keep me balanced, keep me structured, keep the story from straying off, right?
It was a
But
touchstone. It was something, yeah, something. I like to tell people when I do writing coaching, one of the things that I generally suggest in nonfiction is that they always come up with some kind of an outcome driven outline of what do you want the author or what do you want the audience to get out of each chapter, not just an outline of what's in it, but what do you want people to get out of it. So is that kind of what you were doing there, is putting it in a structure where you actually had the narrative that you were building through art, and so that was kind of your tie line that was able to keep you on the plot?
yeah, I think so. The paintings revealed to me sort of some of the key scenes that I had to extrapolate, right? But along the way, where they were helped me because it was, okay, I've got these key scenes that are already given to me,
Yeah.
right? And now how do I just leap from them? Right? And so there's like a dozen plus key scenes. And then it was just a matter of filling it in. That helped me as a first time novelist, right? There are a million ways to do it. I think that some of my approach was wrong in that it didn't help me. So I wrote it, I think, in order, but then there comes a certain point where you lose focus, right? And you start writing, you jump ahead, and then you start getting lost and you start repeating scenes, and that's very dangerous. I discovered, um, right? So I had to then, once that's done for me, it's like, oh boy, I got to start at the beginning, right? And then you got to go through it line by line. And I think at a certain point, that's what I started doing. Once it was pretty much there, the structure of it, then I would go from A to Z again, right? And then do it again and again, and then have someone look at it and sort of pick up something that I missed. Because many times it's like painting, you're staring at a surface and you're missing something because you're just so locked in,
Right.
and you need that outside perspective to fresh pair of eyes to see something that you didn't.
That's why guys like me have salaries.
Yeah,
with writing coaches.
there you go.
But and that's actually something though that when I was young, I primarily did academic writing. I dabbled in novelists. I have an unfinished novel, just like everybody else that's ever had an English degree does. But that was actually something I learned as well when I was learning about writing and began to teach writing. Was that if you have to continue forward, because if you don't continue forward, if you start to try to big picture and look back at what you're doing, you do get into that problem. You do start to repeat. You do start to get stuck in, oh, I need to fix that. Or, oh no, that sounds better if I do it this way. How did you avoid that kind of slippery slope?
I think I looked for, well, a funny answer is I'm sure everyone does this when they write.
They do. I mean, that's why I want to know.
Yeah,
I'll steal it and teach it.
maybe. So I would just make certain paragraphs red or blue. Yeah, I would have a color coding system for a paragraph that is either repeated or needs to be refined. And then if it's done, if it's met its latest, phase draft, I would turn it into just black colors.
Gotcha.
Right. So that was my way to just keep me in check. Because it goes from 80 pages to 100 to, right? It's like, oh my gosh. And I did the whole thing on Word, and, so you're doing a lot of this with the mouse, right? And it was so easy for me to get lost in the pages, right? And so I needed a color coding system. Um, and again, I would refer just to the scenes in the paintings. They were already there, right? And so as long as I met those, I would be fine, I think. And then it's just the build up to each scene that mattered.
And it's also, you mentioned, you're sending it to other people and had other eyes on it. I think that is something that a lot of people miss when they do their first writing. And when I first tried to write in fiction, that was something I didn't do. I didn't want anybody to see it. I'm like, I don't want anybody to see it. I don't want anybody to see it. But what I've learned is the people that have been able to finish their novels, I mean, not everybody is like this, but many of them that have done things like have outside coaching, have done things like have beta readers, have done things like building a structure of accountability to help that bring them along with just suggestions, or even just somebody says, hey, I've read it and it's good, and continue with it. Do you suggest that people use that, or do you feel like they should do the Ian Fleming method and basically just have a bottle of Gordon, sit down and finish it in one go?
Right. The torture genius.
Yeah.
No, I thrive on, just in my career, architecture taught me this at a young age, kind of. It's collaboration is key, right? So I thrive on it, and I totally am into the camp that says like, don't fall too much in love with something yet. Like, let it go through a process and then let it come back to you, right? So working with leaders brands was invaluable. Working with beta readers was invaluable. I had like 3 or 4 different experts over like the last 3 years look at this thing, right? And it helped. I'm so glad I did, because otherwise I would be left to my own devices, which is good at sometimes, but in other times it's not. And, I think that, for a first time novelist, I needed that desperately. Um, so that's my take on it. Yeah, I believe in just collaboration.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think that if more people were to embrace that, I think that there would be more finished work. And I'm happy that I'm definitely happy that you came to us and we were able to help you do it, because this is what we do, and this is what it always excites me about uh, what we offer, is the ability to be able to help authors get past that hump and unlock what is inside of them, and then able to actually go through the issues of the publishing process, because that's a whole animal all in of itself when you get to it.
Yeah, writing it is one thing, and then when it's done, what do you do? Oh my
Right.
goodness. Or which
Well,
direction
hopefully
do
we
you
made
take?
that part of it a little bit
Yes.
easier on you. Yeah. Well,
Yeah, there's no one way, right? But again, like working with leaders brands, working with Annette, for example, and
oh,
Alyssa Camacho, I think they offered that sort of, here's what you should be doing perspective, right? Like
yeah,
change this, that color for that cover color is like, it may have been a good idea for you at the time, but it's burning my retinas because it's so bright and red, right? So you need that. You need someone to sort of, uh, I always call it, you need the John Lennon to your Paul McCartney,
yeah,
because McCartney, if you're a Beatles fan, did pretty much all the work on those songs, but Lennon
yeah.
was there to be like, move this or change that. But and Paul McCartney ultimately needed Lennon because
Yeah,
Lennon was that final push, right? Um, and that's a good working relationship. That's a healthy one. I found it to be healthy.
I completely agree with you. Although I'm a George Harrison fan myself.
Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah.
Manhattan: The Rising War, is this a standalone, or are there other installments in the future?
Yeah, this is. I don't have any ideas for a follow-up for this story. I've got other ideas for other stories, but it's a five-part series in painting form that I summarized in one book, right? And I think I'm stretching it by having the studio edition. Um, I would love to see it sort of extend beyond the pages. There's some ideas I'm floating around. One is kind of an app uh, where it's kind of like a Pokemon Go situation, where you could. I don't want to. I guess I could give parts of it away. I'm developing it further, but it's the idea of the characters from this book are available to you in real time, in some way, and then you're sort of set on this journey, this real-time adventure, like a scavenger hunt of sorts.
That's
Um,
actually that's a really good idea.
right? So
And I'm not telling you that just because we work with you. I think that's a really, really good idea. I think you should
I
probably
I
pursue
blame
that.
my niece. My niece was like, "Why don't you do that?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh, so if it proceeds, my niece will be on their, top billing."
That's
But
awesome. I will check that out. If you do that, I will check that out. And one of the other things I'm going to check out is I'm definitely going to check out Manhattan: The Rising War. That's something that's on my list to read. So, Sal, how can our audience find out a little bit more about you, and how can they get Manhattan: The Rising War?
you could check out my website, salcosenza.com. I love having a website. I advocate it for anyone who's creative because it's like a living portfolio. You could always update it. So I'm constantly updating my website. I'm on Instagram pretty actively. The book is available on Amazon, on Barnes and Noble. If you're local to Arizona, it's at Changing Hands Bookstore, which is an indie bookstore. Um, and I think it's on Walmart.com and
Oh yeah, yeah. We
yeah.
release on pretty much every platform. And ladies and gentlemen, those links will be directly down below. Make sure you check out Sal's website. I did. There's a lot of really fascinating stuff in there. Sal, I mean, I would love to go on with you. We're going to have you back because I want to revisit this a little bit later after we've had some time for this book to be out there and percolate and see maybe what it did for you. But yeah, I appreciate you being on. It was fantastic. I think everybody should pick this one up. This is going to be something really different and very new.
Thank you, Andrew. It was a pleasure talking with you. You're a good conversationist. And
Well,
again, you got to go to New York.
I'm It's on the list, Sal. It's on the list.
You would do well there, and I think they would love you.
Excellent.
I'm speaking for the city.
All right, New York, look out. I've got Sal's back.
Yes. They'll be like,
thank you so
no.
much for being here.
Thank you, Andrew. Have a good one. Thank you, everyone.